Okay, we will get started. Councillor Ventimiglia has sent her regrets. She will not be joining us this evening, and the only one I can see we're missing is Councillor Sadhu, so hopefully he will join us as we get going. Call this regular meeting of Council, Town of Oliver, June 28, 2021. Call it to order. Are there any late items to add, Acting CAO?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. There is item I5 that we'll add to under bylaws, the Good Neighbor Bylaw 1357. The Director of Development Services has a verbal report with this regard. Okay,
thank you. Then I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended by adding bylaw item I5, Good Neighbor Bylaw 1357. Can I get a mover, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call the question. Is anyone opposed? Motion is carried. Moving to our consent agenda. Is there any items on the consent agenda that any councillor would like separated out? Not hearing any. Can I get a motion to adopt the June 28, 2021 consent agenda?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Our committee report this evening. Council was given from our committee of the whole meeting earlier this evening. Council was given a report from the Director of Operations regarding the town's pest management practices. The current practice does use an anticoagulant rodenticide. However, the director explained how its use is proactively managed to make sure only enough is used to affect the targeted rodents and not pass the poison up the food chain. After a discussion with the director, council passed a motion to continue with the current pest management practice. We'll move on to delegations and petitions. We have Trail of Okanagan Society, Janice Lieb and John Bremer here. Are you guys in attendance? I think so. John, yes. Who's going to do the presentation? John, can you speak? I think your mic is off.
Well, my video seems to be off. Just a minute.
There, I think I can see. Is that Janice?
Yes, it is. I'm just renaming myself here.
Okay.
I am not able to share my screen. It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Are you able to help out with that, CAO?
She has access now, Janice?
Yes, it'll take yours down, so.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Just get this here. Is everybody able to see the image on the screen?
I can see it.
Yeah. Perfect. Shall I start?
All right, yeah, for sure, Janice. You got about 10 minutes and then council will have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. So first off, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Trail of the Okanagans. As I said, my name is Janice Levy, and I'm the current president of the Trail of the Okanagan Society. And I'm joined today, I thought there were going to be two directors here, but I don't see Myers Bennett on screen. But John Bremer was instrumental in the development of the International Hike and Bike Trail, which runs through Oliver. He's also an Oliver resident. So he's been very interested in continuing that work and adding it to the Trail of the Okanagans. And Myers Bennett, who's a director with us, is also a counselor with the town of Osoyoos. So if he joins us, he should be on screen. The Trail of the Okanagans, we are an advocacy group with a vision of an uninterrupted 370-kilometer long hiking and biking trail extending all the way from Sicamous to Brewster, Washington. Our focus is the section between the Bennett Bridge and the Canada-US border, and we work in collaboration with the Okanagan Rail Trail and the Shuswap Okanagan Rail Trail, who are developing the route north of Kelowna. It's our collective mission to connect these sections into one seamless trail. The trail can be divided almost exactly into three. There's 120 kilometers in Washington State, 125 kilometers Kelowna North, and 125 kilometers between the Bennett Bridge and the border. Our section presents the toughest challenges, as there are approximately 100 different trail sections to connect, running through 3 First Nations reserves, 2 regional districts, and 7 communities. We are currently in the process of meeting with all of these groups and more, which of course includes this meeting here today, and largely to illustrate the benefits that will come with the completion of the trail and to explain why we believe it should be a priority. There are several reasons why the trail is important, but we would like to focus on the last one on this slide. Many people do not know that the Okanagan is ranked low in the diversity of tourism amenities. Rail trails have proven to be highly popular across Europe and North America, and it will be here too. This trail offers another major amenity to support and connect those that we already have, the amenities that we already have, bringing tourists further afield and directly into communities along its path. But how will this translate into the Okanagan? The Okanagan Rail Trail's economic impact assessment found some pretty interesting things. That the trail would extend the tourist season by a few months on either side of summer, as cyclists are interested in coming earlier and staying later because the weather is more amenable to cycling. It determined that property in proximity of trails have about a 15 to a 30% higher property value upon resale, and it found that the trail would have a significant and positive impact on business activity. We have seen since the Okanagan Rail Trail is open that these projections have become reality for communities along the trails. Just as an example, in Oyama, one of the smallest communities, there are 2 new bike rental places in Oyama, and the owner of the Oyama General Store was in the press talking about how his business has just boomed since they opened up the trail, and that he's busier 2 months earlier and stays busy 2 months later. So exactly what they predicted would happen seems to be happening. That study also stated that if the Okanagan Rail Trail was connected to from Sicamous to Osoyoos, it would vault the trail into one of international significance, because it would then be of a scale to attract the international cycle tourism sector. And it projected that there would be 500,000 users of the Okanagan Rail Trail in its 5th year of operation. It actually met that goal in its 1st year, has exceeded it since, and the trail is yet to be fully connected. And we have not yet seen the numbers in the last year. As we all know, people are getting outside more, and the trail has been busier and busier over the last year during the pandemic. As a result of the numbers now using the Okanagan Rail Trail, every community along the route has or is in the process of building links to the trail to bring those 500,000 annual users directly to their business districts, including developments like Predator Ridge. They actually got a $250,000 grant this year to connect the resort to the Okanagan Rail Trail. Now, while the 50 kilometers of the Okanagan Rail Trail is great to attract the next level of tourism, it really needs to be longer. Cycle tourists look for longer trails. When they're planning a trip, they really want to, if they're coming from distance, they want a tour between 4 and 7 days. They want to be able to ride between 50 and 80 kilometers a day. They want a trail that's safe, comfortable, and most importantly, separated from motorized traffic. We're not talking about people that are road cyclists. We're talking about the larger tourism demographic that are looking for off-road trails. And of course, they're looking for bike-friendly lodging and dining options, which is really important for the communities that are along the trail. So this is really why we are advocating for the connection of all these trails into one, because it puts the Okanagan right into that sweet spot needed to attract this larger market. There are a growing number of grants available to help make this happen. The largest was recently announced this spring by the federal government. They plan to quadruple the amount of money available for this sector to $400 million to be spent over the next 5 years. There's also one that has just come available now, the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant. It has opportunities for application for both planning and for infrastructure projects, with up to 70% funding and a maximum of $500,000 for communities like Oliver. Now, in many ways, Oliver is ahead of the game. Oliver's the only community in the South Okanagan between the bridge and the border that has a completed trail running to and through town. We'd like to point out, though, that there is much more that can be done to capitalize on the trail. This reference, Bicyclists Bring Business, it's available online, and it provides very practical and simple to implement ideas that pull cyclists off the trail and to spend more time and money in town. All you need to do is Google the title, Bicyclists Bring Business, and you can find a downloadable PDF. It comes complete with checklists to assess how you're doing currently and what can be done to increase your draw, including ideas on services, facilities, and programs that will entice cyclists to engage with Oliver. For example, establishing bike rentals at the Coast Hotel could expand off-season business for the hotel, as you can ride both north and south from town, so it puts Oliver in a good place for that. Or, the promotion of Oliver as a hub for wine touring by bike for off-season getaways would support hotels and restaurants and wineries by doing so. And it's probably a good time to point out that the economic benefit analysis done for the Okanagan Rail Trail noted that cycle tourists generally spend more money in smaller towns. They stay longer, and they're more interested in local history and culture than other tourist sectors. We absolutely want to recognize that Oliver is off to a great start. Not only is there a paved all ages and abilities trail at your doorstep, new amenities have just been installed. We're simply pointing out that there can be more things that can be done to get people off the trail and into town. And by the way, we also mean people from Oliver have the opportunity to cycle from town as well. It's not just other people coming to town. Some of the best trail in the Okanagan runs through Oliver. Currently, with the exception of 2 short sections along Highway 97, the pathway is complete from Osoyoos to north of Oliver to the new district wine village that the Osoyoos Indian Band is building. We're currently in conversation with the band and the RDOS together about the potential to extend the pathway further north to Gallagher Lake. And we are about to talk to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure about the 2 gaps on the highway north of Osoyoos. It's really important that those gaps are filled. People will not get on that. Many people will not ride on a highway shoulder. They want to be on a protected pathway. So we need to connect those 2 pieces in. And of course, Oliver is very well poised to be a destination and a way stop for people who are on this route. The opening of the district wine village this month will pull more tourists onto the trail. The Osoyoos Indian Band is actively developing cycle tourism on the pathway, and they intend to open a bike rental facility at the wine village and connect it with tourism groups down to their hotels in Osoyoos. So are there opportunities to get these tour operators to make a stop in Oliver or to be based in Oliver? We certainly think so. All this to say that we're obviously very excited about the potential of the trail. It's closer to reality than you might think. Almost 3/4 of the route is currently cyclable between the bridge and the border, with 30 kilometers of it already built to an all ages and ability standard. Certainly there are going to be challenges, but we are seeing a lot of momentum and a lot of interest, with several sections scheduled for construction in the next few years, as well as trail upgrades planned by the RDOS in the Oliver area. So to summarize, I'd like just to reiterate that Oliver is very well poised to take advantage and build on the opportunity that the trail provides. We'd like to suggest a few ideas here that going forward, if Oliver could work with us, the town of Osoyoos, the RDOS, and the OIB to advocate for MODI to create protected cycle paths off the highway to complete those 2 gaps that we just talked about. That there's an opportunity for Oliver to connect your economic development initiatives with those that encourage cycle tourism and increase visits to Oliver. We will watch for grants and let you know, but if you know of them, let us know. We can work together. We have, in cases, helped communities write grant applications. We're just doing that in Peachland recently, another one in Summerland. So where there's opportunities for us to jointly apply, we'd be very happy to do that. And the last one is there's members of our group that are working to set up a meeting at UBCM with relationship to the use of the KVR along Vaso Lake. That trail really is regulated federally, but there are we're trying to come at it from many different angles to advocate for the KVR trail to become part of this, rather than going along the highway, which really doesn't have the road section to make a trail in that location. So that takes us through the presentation, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Janice. That's a great deal of information there. Anyone on council have a question, comment? Councilor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't really have any questions. I want to thank you for your presentation, first of all. I've always been an advocate for the potential for bike trails in Oliver. I believe that council has it on our list of priorities, and it's actually quite high on the list, although I don't know that any action has been taken of late, to also use the irrigation canal right away as a trail. It was, we are looking at what's involved in doing that, and certainly would be interested, I think the town would be interested in knowing more about grants available for that sort of thing, if we could develop that as a parallel trail and make loops as well and join up different areas. I see the potential. I have members of my family that cycle all over the world, and I know that people will come from all over the world for this type of thing. So I'm all for it, and if we can help, I'm there for you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands, Janice. Oh, Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Worship. Janet, thank you. Great presentation. And just wanted to know if you had a chance to make this presentation to the Oliver Tourism Society. They do a lot of great work, and it would be really a hand-in-hand thing if they were part of this.
We haven't done that yet. We'd be very happy to. If you could help make us a contact, that we will approach them and see if we can do that.
Yeah, if you just contact Ms. Vakovich, the corporate officer, I'm sure she could get you in touch with Oliver Tourism.
Thank you.
Well, Janice, again, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. As an active cyclist, my wife and I are out e-biking anyway, enjoying trails, and the potential is amazing. The further that we can go. The other thing I think we need to look at is getting some maintenance done, because some of the trails are getting in a little bit of rough shape, but they're still very, very cyclable for sure. And if you are successful in getting that meeting set up, I'd be more than happy to join you at UBCM. Thank
you. And I will say, if you're not aware, I'm pretty sure the RDOS has applied for tenure for the International Hike and Bikeway, and it's a 2-year process. They're a year into it. I was speaking to Mark Woods just last week about this. He says as soon as they get that, they intend to upgrade and do a higher level of maintenance along the International Hike and Bikeway, and they intend to pave the section, the gravel section that's just south of that for a ways. So there are things in the works that the RDOS is planning to do. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Again, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'll give you a minute, Diane, to get our screen back up. Moving to water matters. Not too much on the agenda. Anything to report this evening, Councillor Michelle?
Nope, just the meeting right now.
Okay. And I don't think Councillor Sadhu has joined us. So I will move on to bylaws. Our first item, the zoning amendment bylaw 1380.17, 5753 Main Street. I will pass this over to Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Worship. I have to be given permission here to share my screen. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you, Worship. This application is for zoning amendment bylaw 1380.17 for 5753 Main Street. The applicant is proposing a land use change on the subject property from a seasonal campground to a year-round Strata RV resort, in conjunction with a site-specific zoning amendment to the CT1 zone in order to facilitate a bare land strata subdivision. Since the proposed use and minimum lot sizes do not meet the minimum requirements in the CT1 zone, a site-specific zoning amendment is required. Subject property location map just north of the Bilo Mall there. That is an ortho photo showing the existing campground. The OCP designation for the property is C2, which is, or CT rather, which is commercial tourist. And the zoning is CT1, tourist commercial 1. Photos of the subject property on the left is the Main Street elevation. Also on the right shows the Main Street elevation. The left shows the south wind elevation of the subject property, and on the right shows the airport, which is the east elevation of the subject property. On the left shows internal site photos as well on the right. More internal site photos. And this is a photo of their front gate, which is closed. Site plan, as you'll see, Highway 97 on the left with the entry, and then there's also the additional entry/exit on Airport Street. The proposed amendment involves two key components, one being a change in use from a seasonal campground to the long-term RV year-round resort, and the other being new provisions added for the development of strata RV lots, which include a decreased minimum lot width in areas to enable the subdivision of the parcel into approximately 65 new lots. Staff concerns. The proposed amendment will enable the continuance of the unauthorized use of the property as a year-round RV resort, with long-term accommodation rather than temporary rentals for tourists, which staff consider to be a departure from the intent of the commercial tourist designation of the OCP. Approval of the zoning amendment and eventual subdivision will facilitate the marketing and purchasing of affordable lots in a time when it's difficult to find an affordable place to live. The provisions in the proposed amendment do not go far enough to prevent the owner from purchasing a lot with permanent occupation in mind. The proposed amendment does not prevent an owner from storing a recreational vehicle on their lot and occupying it on an infrequent basis, thus prohibiting the use for the public. Permitting the land use change to facilitate the subdivision results in staff being required to communicate with 65 new property owners rather than the one that currently exists now, if there are any future anticipated bylaw enforcement issues. Another concern is the ownership structure changing and the motivation level of individual owners to rent out their lot to the traveling public, which is the intended use of the zoning and OCP designation of commercial tourism. It's important to note that these concerns result directly from the subdivision, creating a multiple owner situation. Currently, the property owner is motivated to rent out the sites to the traveling public to earn an income. The subdivision of this property into multiple individual lots almost entirely eliminates this motivation. The subject property is one of the few commercial tourist properties in the town with highway frontage. Subdividing this property into numerous strata RV lots eliminates the possibility almost entirely that the property will ever be redeveloped into its highest and best use. Staff received feedback from neighboring municipalities with similar RV strata zones, who expressed several concerns with the challenges associated with the enforcement of these resorts relating to permanent accommodation and additions to recreational vehicles. In the Columbia Shuswap Regional District, any bylaws associated with new strata RV resorts are written specifically to only allow seasonal accommodation. In areas where a property had long-term or annual occupation of RVs and park models before land use bylaws were implemented, specific zoning conditions were written to allow for that use to continue. In one of the resorts, the strata voluntarily shuts off water and sewer in the fall and closes for the winter to help avoid any permanent accommodations or servicing damage in the winter. OCS has been dealing with significant challenges with this zone, such as owners of strata lots applying for their BC homeowners grants, as they have identified their strata RV lot as their primary residence. In the RDOS, this zone was created for a property in Okanagan Falls, but is not yet developed. Other concerns with the provisions: the definition of strata RV resort does not prevent someone from moving from lot to lot within the resort after the 2-month or maximum 6-month duration of stay has been reached. The maximum 60 consecutive days during the summer months means that a person could stay for 2 consecutive months, leave for 1 night, return for 2 months, and so on. This would also not prevent someone from buying 2 lots and using one for 6 months and then the other for 6 months as permanent accommodation. The definition does not prohibit park model homes, modular homes, manufactured homes, as indicated in the definition of campground. There are no provisions for the maximum number of RVs permitted per strata lot. The provisions do not include adequate setbacks for RVs from strata parcel lines for fire safety purposes, which is exacerbated with year-round accommodation which is what we saw last winter with some of the long-term winter residents retrofitting their RVs with wood-burning stoves. Not in this part particular, but I just wanted to state that. There is no covenant requirement that would assist in making potential buyers aware that permanent accommodation is not permitted. To address these concerns through the process, staff did share some of these with the developer, who decided not to incorporate any of them into their provisions. To be consistent with the OCP, for tourist commercial, staff considered that the use should remain commercial tourism in the high season, which is the maximum 30 days from April 1st to October 31st. As a condition of the zoning amendment, a covenant should be registered that prohibits further subdivision unless a covenant is registered on each of the individual lots that requires entering into a rental pool that is operated by a single licensed rental pool manager, as well as mentioning that it prohibits permanent occupancy. Requiring that all lots be part of a rental pool rather than just the 8 proposed will help to track each lot and ensure bylaw provisions for the duration of stay are being adhered to. It should also be noted that the definition of a vacation rental within the zoning bylaw has a 30-day limit as well on stays. The current definition of campground states that recreational vehicles are to be brought to the site by the traveler. This is a provision that should be carried forward, which will help to prevent an owner from storing a recreational vehicle on the property when not in use. Outdoor storage is not a permitted use. A 1.5 meter setback should be required for RVs from Strata parcel lines to ensure fire safety is addressed. With that, the options for council is they may choose to support the staff recommendation, may choose to give it first and second reading and proceed to the public hearing, or may choose to refer back to staff. The staff recommendation is that zoning amendment bylaw 138017 be denied first and second reading. Thank you, Your Worship. And I do believe that the applicant's agent is here to speak to the application as well. Thank you.
Okay. Who's the applicant agent?
It is Mr. Alenko.
Mr. Alenko? Mr. Alenko, are you ready to say a few words?
Yes, I am. I'm just trying to figure out how I can upload my my presentation here.
Brad, do you have permission on when you click share screen?
Okay, am I on?
Not yet. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to provide a brief presentation this evening. Thanks, Randy, for the introduction. Later on in my presentation here, I'm going to address some of the concerns that Randy had. He had quite a grocery list of concerns. I'm going to try to deal with most of them as best I can, but we'll move forward from here. So just want to give a little bit of background for council. The RV resort has been in operation for about 20 years, and the current owner has owned the resort for approximately 13 of those years. Although variability in weather is an accepted part of the RV accommodation business, over the past 20 years, the increase in forest fire activity and the resulting smoke has reduced vacancy levels in the resort. This increase in the uncertainty and vacancy rates in the resort has led to reduced revenues and problems in the resort's operational financing. Over the 13 years that the current owner has owned the property, the resort has only turned a profit in 2 of the 3 years, and the owner has had to cover over $500,000 in losses over the past 13 years. As this financial loss trend is not sustainable, the owner has had to evaluate whether to cut his losses and close the resort, or think of a creative way that would allow the RV resort to remain in operation. The owners have determined that a change in the tenure or ownership of the resort from a single owner model to a multi-owner model, which would result in the RV sites being sold as tourist vacation properties, would allow the tourist resort to remain in operation. The multi-owner model will allow the maintenance costs of the resort to be paid by the new owners and the strata, which will result in no risk of the resort not having operational funds in the future due to low occupancy rates. Just going to talk a little bit about the change in ownership and occupancy. The goal of the present ownership group is to find a way to keep the RV resort open and viable, and the best way to have that, the best way they have determined to do this is through changing the ownership model from a single ownership model to a multi-ownership. They wish to convert the single ownership RV resort to a multi-ownership resort by subdividing the existing Desert Gem RV resort property to create individual Strata RV lots from the existing RV sites. The Strata lots can be owned as a vacation accommodation property and used by the owners and their family, co-workers, and anyone they choose to share their Oliver vacation accommodation with. The existing RV resort will not change substantially in appearance or servicing, as the owner intends to utilize as much of the existing servicing as possible, but will want to improve some of the existing smaller RV sites. The office building will become common property and will continue to serve as the office for the Strata and the resort manager. The owners are considering a slight reduction in the number of sites to accommodate more on-site amenities, such as a swimming pool for the users of the resort. Future owners will be able to place their RV sites into a rental pool to allow the sites to be rented to the public when not being used by visitors who are friends or family of the owners. This will create some revenue for the owners when the site is not used by the owner or any of their guests. To ensure the RV resort can accommodate visitors escaping the prairies or the north during cold winter months, the proposal requests an increased ability for visitors to stay in Oliver through the winter months. The increased occupancy provisions allow a visitor to stay in Oliver during the winter months up to 180 days, and allows the owner of the RV of the lot to stay and visit in Oliver for up to 60 consecutive nights between May and September 30th. In terms of rezoning requirements, the rezoning amendment is not a proposal to change the land use of the site, but rather is an attempt to find a way to keep the land use in place. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the tourist commercial OCP designation, as recreation vehicle accommodation is being provided on the CT designated land. That's policy 10.3.1 in the OCP. And the owner is proposing an innovative tourist and visitor oriented use as noted in policy 10.3.2 also of the OCP. Aside from a new definition of RV resort being proposed to be included in the zoning bylaw, the site-specific requirements in the zoning bylaw are to provide some parcel area and some site requirements for Strata RV lots, as the present parcel size and area information in the zoning bylaw is for the parent parcel and not applicable for individual Strata lots. Aside from improvements to the RV resort to make some of the sites better for RV use and the provision of possibly adding some amenities for visitors and guests' enjoyment, there will be no discernible difference between the present single owner Desert Gem RV resort and the proposed Strata RV resort. So I want to talk a little bit about tourist accommodation in Oliver. Despite the historic financial problems, the owners do not wish to close the RV resort, but rather have found an innovative way to allow the resort to remain and thrive, simply through an alternative ownership structure. The proposed tourist recreation accommodation will be of interest to people who regularly visit Oliver and want to prepay for their vacation accommodation. Lots within the Strata RV resort would also be of interest to Oliver residents or any other investor who wants to earn monthly revenue from the rental of an RV site. Presently, there does not appear to be any restrictions on occupancy limits in motels in Oliver. Staff appears to be concerned with long stays in the RV resort, but are not concerned with longer stays in motels. This seems odd, as it's easier or more likely that tourist accommodation in motels will be used for longer stays than RV resort sites. There seems to be unjustifiably more emphasis on long stays in RV resort accommodation than on hotel rooms, which are also tourist accommodation. And I'm going to address a few of the concerns that Randy had went through. So Randy made a comment that the applicant is proposing a land use change from a campground to a strata resort. The existing RV strata resort, the strata land use will not change. This use has never operated as a seasonal campground, and that is evident by the name it was given since the resort opened, Desert Gem RV Resort. This tourist accommodation operation is not being converted from a campground, as it never was a campground. It's always been an RV resort, and the intention is to keep it as an RV resort. A concern that the town had, the proposed amendment will enable the continuance of the unauthorized use of the property as a year-round RV resort with long-term accommodation. The users of the Desert Gem RV Resort will be visitors and tourists to Oliver, and provisions for rental pool and the presence of occupancy duration limits will ensure the use remains for temporary accommodation. Several of the tourist accommodation operations in Oliver offer year-round accommodation and monthly rentals. The proposed RV resort will offer seasonal accommodation for visitors wishing to escape harsher winter climates, and will have zoning restrictions preventing full-time occupancy. Another concern, recent visit by staff in midday and early June revealed the front entrance gate was closed for public access, no trespassing signs, which does not present the image of a business open for commercial tourism, but rather a gated community for occupation by long-term residents. Our response is simply, it's typical practice to close a gate when the RV is full. The gate also included signs which note the park was full and provided a phone number to call if a guest with a reservation was arriving. Many private properties include no trespassing signs. Desert Gem attempts to provide privacy and security for its guests and discouraging trespassing. There's no sense of trying to mislead the public with the gates being closed. It's simply a privacy and a protection issue. Concern being approval of the zoning amendment and eventual subdivision will facilitate the marketing and purchasing of affordable lots in a time when it's difficult to find an affordable place to live. Our response is that the definition of the proposed use restricts individual occupancy to 180 days per year. More so, a covenant will be registered in the title, which prohibits occupancy beyond 180 days and not more than 60 consecutive nights between May 1st and September 30th. Regulations will be in place through the zoning bylaw, just as there are regulations in place for every other zone in the town of Oliver. A concern being that permitting the land use change to facilitate the subdivision results in staff being required to communicate with 65 new property owners rather than a single property owner when it comes to anticipated bylaw enforcement issues, such as duration of stay, unauthorized construction, untaxed premises, etc. This statement assumes that individuals will ignore zoning bylaws and strata documents which outline the rules and regulations of the RV resort. We do not believe this to be true, and there is no basis for this opinion. Given that there will be a site manager who will be operating a rental pool, we believe that the majority of the day-to-day monitoring of the site, including unauthorized construction and untidy properties, will be dealt with by the strata and/or site manager. Most property owners tend to value their investment, and in doing so will adequately maintain their properties. We also anticipate a significant portion of these lots will be placed in the rental pool, and as such, the owners would ensure that lots are in pristine condition to maximize the nightly rental rates which can be charged. Concern that ownership structure changing and motivation level of individual owners to rent out their lot to the traveling public, tourists being diminished. The owners themselves are tourists, so we believe that the intent of this designation is being met. As noted in our application, 25% of the RV stalls will remain for nightly rentals, and the remaining RV lots will have the option of being placing their lots in the rental pool. We strongly believe that a significant number of individuals will choose to place their lots in the rental pool, and we simply do not want to require individuals to do so, as we believe this is a choice which the purchaser should make. They may choose to rent their RV lots to friends, family members, or co-workers, all of whom will be tourists when they arrive. There seems to be a misconception that tourists can't be related to or known to the strata lot owners. Also, the owner wants to provide an opportunity whereby multiple families could purchase one lot, and each family is allocated a certain number of weeks and/or months to occupy the site. In these instances, all of the users would be tourists. However, they may not wish to place the lot in a rental pool, and we would like to be able to offer that flexibility to future owners. It's interesting that the value of providing RV sites to the traveling public appears to be high in importance to the town now, but it did not seem to be important when the town sold a public campground beside the river not too long ago. Concern that currently the property owner is motivated to rent the sites out to the traveling public to earn income. The subdivision of this property into individual lots as almost entirely eliminates this motivation. Our response is 25% of the sites are reserved for rentals. So these sites will be rented with income being shared between the rental manager and the lot owner. Most owners will seek a return on their investment through the rental pool by capitalizing on periods unavailable for owner occupancy. A concern that the subject property is one of the few tourist commercially zoned properties in town with highway frontage. Subdividing this property into numerous strata lots eliminates the possibility almost entirely that the property will ever be redeveloped into its highest and best use. This is an opinion on what is the highest and best use of the property. The property is proposed to be used for what it's designated and zoned for. This statement is also speculative because if there is a demand in the future for more intensive commercial tourist use, for example, a hotel, a developer will find appropriately zoned land or will apply for an OCP amendment and rezone to fill that gap. There was a concern that the definition of strata RV resort does not prevent someone from moving lot to lot within the resort after the consecutive 2 months or maximum 6-month duration of stay had been reached. This would also not prevent someone from buying 2 lots and using one for 6 months and the other for 6 months as permanent accommodation. And our response is, it would simply not be practical or appealing for anyone attempting to reside permanently on these lots to purchase 2 lots just for the sake of playing games with time restrictions. It would be cheaper and substantially more convenient to simply buy a small home for vacation use. There was some concerns over setbacks. There is no difference or increased fire hazard between a single owner RV resort and a strata RV resort. There will always be approximately 4 to 6 meters of space between RVs based on how their standardized service connections are provided. And I just want to elaborate about that on a bit. Staff had mentioned something about wood burning stoves. Clearly that wasn't in this RV resort, so it's not terribly relevant. But at the end of the day, this is an RV resort and it's not a residential dwelling. All RVs have got service outlets on the driver's side. So that side of the RV needs to be within a half a meter of the property line. And immediately adjacent to that is the open space or the amenity space for the other RV. So there's 4 to 6 meters there. So the issue of setbacks and fire issues, it is simply a non-issue. There is simply no difference between this setup and an existing RV situation that's owned by one individual. And the final concern that I just want to raise, and there were addressed, and there was a number more, but there was a concern that there's no covenant requirement that would assist in making potential buyers aware that permanent accommodation is not permitted. And our response simply is the provision in the zoning bylaw advises the potential buyer of the land use restrictions. And it would be no different than the town saying they want a covenant on a single family property to prevent that property from being developed for multifamily. When you buy that lot, it has a zone. It's got restrictions on that zone, and it indicates what that property can be used for. And to suggest that you need a bunch of covenants on here to reinforce would simply suggest that every single family lot in Oliver then should have a covenant to say that it can't be used for a gas station or a multifamily dwelling. So in summary, Mr. Mayor and Council, we're asking you to please give the bylaw first and second reading and allow it to go to public hearing, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And Diane or Randy, are you able to see, or Mayor Johansson, are you able to see whether the clients are on the line? I'm not sure that they want to speak, but I believe that they are joining. And if there are any questions of council that I can't answer, the owner of the park is actually on the line.
Well, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Erlenko. I think you provided a lot of information here. If there is any questions, I will allow those questions to go through, but at this point, let's let council have some discussion.
Sure.
See where the discussion goes.
Thank
And if we do get through first and second reading, there's always a public hearing as well. Dan, are you able to stop sharing the screen, I guess? Council, open to questions, comments? Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first question would be through to the director. All of the concerns that you outlined, I believe are quite real concerns, but I don't see solutions written into any type of the zoning change bylaw. For me to move forward, I would need more of those concerns in that bylaw regarding the length of stay, many of the things that you mentioned in that. So that's one of the requirements I would have. Mr. Erlenko, the question that I have is, what benefit will the town gain by doing this? Many of the things that you described and talked about, I don't see as being any different than what we have today, other than the fact that, I guess, by pre-selling the lots, that the owner basically is no longer the owner and is basically saying, well, the money I'm taking for selling each of these lots is equivalent to being full for the next 3 years for that owner, but not for the next owner, for the Strata owner. So what difference will it make to the town?
Sure, if I can answer that through the mayor. Councillor Mattis, there's two angles to that. The first angle, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the owners have had the property for 13 years. And quite honestly, unfortunately, it's been hemorrhaging for most of that period of time to the tune of $500,000. And the owners they don't want to close the resort down, and they're looking for options to try to save it, to keep it open, because there aren't that many left in Oliver. And the one way to do that is through this type of a sale. So that's the first point, is that if this project, if this property, if this RV resort doesn't work, it'll just simply close. So we're looking for ways to try to keep it open. The second aspect is, I guess, more on the financial side. With approximately 40 or so lots, right now there's 65 RV sites in there, but some of them are small, they'll be made slightly larger, and there might be a few sites that'll be taken up for amenity space. But there's essentially going to be 40 some residential or that type of lot with value being created, and that there's going to be a revenue stream to the town. So with these commercial RV lots coming on board, there's going to be a taxation benefit to the town as well. So keeping the park open and creating some taxation revenue for the town of Oliver it's not about getting rich or getting out. It's about trying to survive. And this seems to be one of the few ways that they can do it. They've looked at a few other land use options with this. We haven't got much traction on it, and this is sort of the last stand, so to speak, to see if we can try to figure out a way to make this work.
So you're suggesting that the town would collect more taxes going this route?
I would suspect so. I would suspect that the aggregate value of 41 RV lots would be greater in value than one RV resort. I'm just surmising. I'm not an appraiser, but that would be my assumption, that the value of the collective number would be greater.
Okay. As far as your assertion about the losses over the years, I certainly respect that. As a businessman myself, I'm not sure that I would know of anyone that would continue to operate for 11 out of 13 years at a continuous loss without taking some action a long time ago to improve things. So we don't have your financials, and I know we have to take your word for it, but I'll be honest with you, I have a hard time believing that. And thank you.
I appreciate
that's it for me.
Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Your Worship. The thing that worries me about this proposal, and I have seen it many times in other areas, but specifically in Osoyoos, is that people with RVs will buy a strata lot, put their RV there, and they are not interested in going into a rental pool. They just want a place to land on their holidays. And so they would stay for their 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe a week before summer and a week after summer, and then it would be vacant. And thus we have, it completely takes away from the commercial tourism aspect that the property is zoned for. The other thing is, we're taking it away from the other regulations we have for Airbnb and short-term rentals. If you're considering this like a short-term rental or an Airbnb where somebody comes in and stays in that unit, we have regulations in town that the owners have to be present and things like that. So, this is circumventing that, even though it's going to be a very similar situation. So I have compassion for the owners that have been losing money, but I have a hard time believing that this will be good for the town. Thank you, Your Worship.
Anyone else on council have a question or comment? I will go to Scott Nelson, who has his hand up, and you have just a few minutes, Scott. Let us know what you're thinking.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm not used to using Zoom, so hopefully you can hear me. Just a couple of comments. We are certainly able and willing to provide financial statements to prove the losses over the last few years. Some of the, there was one statement made by Mr. Uhl that was quite astonishing, that we hadn't worked with him, I think was the gist of what he said. We had gone back and forth with him and responded to most of his concerns, and then he subsequently did the staff report and added new concerns that we never had a chance to address. There will be less lots than there are now, so fire separation will be greater than what currently exists. So that's a non-issue. We believe that one of the benefits to the town is that this will allow for people primarily because of what's happened with Area 27. There's a demand, we believe, for people to own RV lots, and they'll want to have a place in Oliver. And if there isn't an option, the rumor is that the band is going to, or the First Nation is going to do something similar up on their property. And if that doesn't happen, then these people will stay in a Soyuz or Penticton or Columbia Falls where they can have ownership. The other thing is that these long-term stays are being done by everybody in the town of Oliver right now. And that's just a fact. And I don't know if Randy checked into that or not. I just did a test. You can book a longer stay at the Coast Hotel, for an example. They don't do monthly rentals, but they'll certainly rent you a room for 30 days. And I don't know that when the town sold that land to for the hotel, that there was any of these restrictions placed on the land and what was going to be done with the land. That has suddenly become an issue with Randy with our proposed use. And I think that our application has been incorrectly described as a campground. We're not a campground. And I think the use of the word campground was to try to fit us into a box that we don't belong in as far as length of stay and a lot of things. So I guess we think it's a net positive for the town, not only in terms of tax revenue, but also it will bring people in to Oliver that will stay in Oliver versus going somewhere else where they have the option to own versus renting. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I have a question for the director. Just wondering if he could explain how the property taxes would work and utility, would each site be paying separate for utilities and how that would all sort out? Or, it's almost like creating a little subdivision, and just wondering how that creating such a place would actually potentially create more revenue for the town, or at least cover off the cost of this strata operating in the town of Oliver.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, I wouldn't really be able to be the expert on this matter as it's sort of a financial question. So I'm not sure if the Chief Financial Officer would be able to speak a little bit more on the taxation and also utility moving forward if the application were to be approved.
I don't see Doug on the call, but the Deputy Finance Officer is on. She maybe have an idea about taxes and strata properties if Ms. McGoffin is available.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not quite sure for the taxes. Utilities right now, in a normal strata unit, we would just bill the strata as one unit for utilities, but it's something definitely that I would have to talk to Doug Leahy about. We'd discuss that to figure that out for you guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll just close with a comment on mine. I'm not sure what the best process is here to approve going to first and second reading and then get some more information that we'd be able to make a better decision at third reading, or we send this back to staff for more information. There was a comment from Councillor Mattis as well about information on the details in the bylaw. That would be good information to have as well. So I'm definitely looking for more information here before making a final decision on this. Councillor Grice?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd agree with that as well. I think that there's some questions that we need answered prior to going to first and second reading. I did want to ask, I think Scott was the owner who was speaking. What is your average length of stay right now? Would you say, are people coming for a week? Are they staying for 3 months? Or what does it look like there currently?
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
That's something we'd have to look at. I'd be guessing, but I would say, it would vary, in the prime season versus the off season, but I would say the average stay might be a couple of weeks I mean, we could probably get you better information on that. The one thing.
That is something I'd like to hear. Just, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And then.
Carry on, sorry, go ahead.
Just going back to the tax thing, let's say, and I'm just estimating, guessing based on some other properties that we've looked at. I mean, if, let's say we had 40 lots, you know, even if the tax bill for a Strata RV lot was $2,000 a year, that's $80,000. I think our tax bill currently is about 13. Tax day is coming up soon, but I'm pretty sure it's about 13,000. So there will be a significant difference in revenue, I believe, which is obviously a benefit to the town.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank
So
you.
that is information that I would like to see before making a decision on a new zoning by. I mean, my observations living in town is that people are staying there for much longer than 2 weeks. It looks like there's some pretty permanent fixtures in there. And then, yeah, I would want to see some of these concerns addressed in the bylaw prior to first and second. Those are comments for now. Thank you.
I don't see anybody else with their hand up at this point in time. Would anybody like to make a stab at a motion asking for more information? Councilor Grace?
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Mayor Johansson. So I'll move that council direct staff to report back with more information regarding property taxes of a subdivision RV resort versus the RV resort as a whole, as well as information regarding the average length of stay. And Councillor Mattis, do you want to help out with the bylaw portion of it? I guess just with the concerns of the director be outlined in the bylaw. I think you're nodding. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I was on mute. Absolutely, I'll attempt to help out with that, and that the Director of Operations provide further amendments to the bylaw to resolve some of the issues that have been raised. I would also like to know that under the Tourism Authority is moving towards a room tax to help promote Oliver better, and I would also like this to remain included in that. So to me, it's, if you're a Strata lot, then you would be paying that tax every night of the year, whether you're occupied or not, just because of the nature of how it is. Whereas, and I would certainly want to have that included. So I'm going to throw that in there as well to look into the logistics of the, maybe Councillor Schwarzenberger can help me with the term here, what it's called, that particular tax. MRDT, thank you very much.
MRDT, yes.
That's okay. I think we'll also, as we go through this, you know, we've looked at it a little bit tonight, but I think we'll have an opportunity to get back to the director to raise other concerns and get answers to other questions as we think about this more. We've certainly had something to think about tonight, but I don't think that that's over with yet. So I know I'll be getting back to the director with more questions.
Director?
Thank you, Worship. I did want to point out the difficulty that I'm going to have bringing this back in terms of addressing the issues. So the concerns outlined by myself were directed to the applicant through our technical referral outcome, and none of those changes were put into the bylaw, and I let them shape the bylaw. So I'm not sure how I could possibly work together with them to bring these items back.
I think it might be more a case of working with council. If council brings forward concerns to you that if there's issues that we would like in the bylaw, then it's something that would go in there, and then council would debate it as a whole to determine whether they would remain or be removed. You know, I think you've had your shot with the proponent, but I think it's now to have a turn with council, so to speak.
Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just say I agree with that as well. I think it was great that you consulted with the applicant, but at this point, if there's concerns that haven't been resolved by the applicant, then I think it's up to us to resolve those concerns to the satisfaction of mayor and council before we go to first and second reading. And also, I will move the proposed motion.
I would second it.
Okay. Scott, we do have a moved and seconded motion on the table, so public input is really not appropriate at this point in time. Any other comments or questions from council? Not hearing any. Oh, Councillor Grace.
Me again. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I guess the only other thoughts I'm having that I'm sort of struggling with is, I mean, as far as the operations as a strata go, I'm not so worried about us having to sort of deal with the, 41 or 60 or however many units we end up having as far as, length of stay and stuff like that. I think if they have a good strata in place, that's going to hopefully self-regulate as many stratas do. But my main concern is making sure that this does stay true to the commercial tourism zoning that it's in, and that's held on to into the future. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grace. Not seeing any more hands up from council. I will call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving on to item 2, zoning amendment bylaw 1380.18, 6234 Main Street. I will pass this over to the Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Worship. Just bring up my screen here. Sorry, just a sec. Find my other presentation. There we go. Okay. Perfect. This application is for zoning amendment bylaw 1380.18 for 6234 Main Street. The applicant is proposing to relocate their existing butcher shop from Station Street to Main Street. The proposed use falls under the definition of food and beverage processing, which is not listed as a permitted use in the town center zone. For this reason, a site-specific zoning amendment is required. Here's the property location map, located in the center of the downtown. There's an ortho view showing the subject property. The OCP for the property is town center, with the zoning also being town center. Photos of the subject property on the left shows the Main Street elevation, and on the right shows the lane elevation of the subject property. Here's a floor plan. The portion in the front, this is the entry along the top. This will be sort of their retail sales area. And then in the back, they may have some cutting up front. I'm not sure about that, but the back is more of the storage area. Staff comments, the definition of food and beverage processing in the zoning bylaw reads as follows. It means a business premise or building where produce, meat, or beverages are processed, produced, canned, frozen, packed, or stored indoors, and includes the brewing or distilling of alcoholic beverages or alcoholic products with alcoholic content. The site-specific amendment will also enable a distillery, winery, or other related business to open in this location in the future. Staff considered the impacts of these types of businesses on neighboring properties and the character of Main Street to be minimal, provided that retail sales are part of the on-site operation. This will help to ensure that any future food and beverage processing use have a retail focus rather than simply wholesale production. And that's what my understanding is why this is not listed as a permitted use in the Main Street in more of the heavy commercial areas, is because food and beverage processing may not always have a commercial component to it. And that's something that you'd want to keep on Main Street. Staff do not see any added concerns of a butcher shop being located in close proximity to the neighboring properties beyond ensuring that garbage pickup occurs on a frequent basis. This proposal will help to fill another empty retail space along Main Street, leading to more local and tourist traffic in the downtown core. The detriment, however, is the departure from the existing Station Street location. The relocation will provide an opportunity for expansion for the business owners. Options for council is they may choose to support it, may choose not to, or may choose to refer it back to staff. And with that, the staff recommendation is that zoning bylaw 138018 be read a first and second time and proceed to a public hearing, and that the holding of the public hearing be scheduled for July 12th, and that staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Director. Questions for the Director? Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't really have any questions. For the purposes of discussion, I would move the motion that, if I can find it here on my other screen. There we go. That zoning amendment bylaw 1380.18 be read first and second time and proceed to a public hearing. And that holding of a public hearing be scheduled for July 12th, 2021. And that staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act.
I will second that motion.
I'll carry on here now that I have a seconder, in that I think that this is a great addition to downtown. I congratulate the move, Ravina and her partner, to take the business up to Main Street. I think it's a great thing. I'm not sure what we would lose by not changing the zoning completely to allow this sort of thing. I know there's that concern about the retail component, but if we can fill empty spots on Main Street, I'm all for the activity.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Mattis. I think this is a great addition to Main Street. Matt and Ravina have worked hard and built a great clientele. And this is actually more of a retail establishment than it is a food processor, although, of course, the food processing is part of it. But I think this is a great addition to Main Street, and I'm definitely in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Worship. I can't really add much more than what's already been said, but I know the director had mentioned that this may be to the detriment of the Station Street location, but I think if anything, it'll just relieve some pressure down there. It's certainly pretty bottlenecked every time I try to go down to visit either of those businesses. So I think it's going to be great for our Main Street, improve our foot traffic and our shopping there. And congratulations to Matt and Ravina. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo the comments of my colleagues. I definitely think this is a great move and something that will really do well on Main Street. Any further comments, questions? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 3, building bylaw 1404 for adoption. Proposed motion is that council adopt the building bylaw 1404.
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Second, thank you. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Not hearing any, I will call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 4, bylaw notice enforcement bylaw 1406 for adoption. Proposed motion is that council adopt the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw 1406.
So moved.
So moved and second. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Not hearing any, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. And item 5, our good neighbor bylaw 1357. I'll pass this over to the Director of Development Services, who has a verbal report for us.
Thank you, Your Worship. So given the current heat wave, construction typically can't start until 7 a.m. during the week, and then I believe 8 a.m. on Sundays. And staff had just considered the impact of the heat wave on construction workers during this time. And with construction being such an important part of the economy at this time, especially within Oliver, staff are recommending the resolution up here, that council directs staff that for the duration of the current heat wave affecting British Columbia, which extends to July 9th, being the end of next week, that the town temporarily not enforce section 7.2E and F of the Good Neighbor bylaw for construction related work starting as early as 6 a.m. Monday through Saturday and 7 a.m. on Sunday. That's all. Thank you.
Any comments? Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in favor of this motion. I have a husband who works in this industry, and I've been pretty worried about his comfort and safety lately. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is a safety issue. So it may be a bit of a noise inconvenience for people during this heat wave, but I think safety takes precedence over that. So I will, on that note, move the proposed motion.
Anyone want to second that?
I'll second.
Second. Yeah, I think this is a good idea. I was actually talking about this weekend with some construction workers, and not being able to start before 7 a.m. is, we need to make an adjustment on that, especially with these conditions. Any further comments or questions? Council Director of Development Services?
Thank you. No, I just wanted to add that we'll communicate this out. We have a developer and builder email list, so we'll communicate this out right away tomorrow and let people aware.
Okay. Councillor Grace, is that a hand left over or a new hand?
I didn't realize it was left over, but I was just going to put that up again, just to suggest perhaps that we put some information out in social media as well, just letting the greater public know that we've passed this motion. So if maybe just to reduce some calls to bylaw should there be construction at 6 a.m.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions before I call the question? Not seeing any. I'll call a question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to business. First item is the 2020 annual report. I'll pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The 2020 annual report is before council to present it to council, and it's for your consideration. In accordance with the community charter, section 99, the report is to be provided to council every year. That includes our audited financial statements, permissive tax exemptions, a report respecting municipal services and operations, performance measures and objectives, and any other information that council considers advisable. We've met the advertising requirements for the 14-day public inspection, and we have it on our website for people to view. I just wanted to point out that in the annual report, there's some different pages that we've put in this year. On page 7 of the report, we've included a tribute to the late Bill Ross. On page 10, we included information on the COVID-19 pandemic and the Because We Care initiative that was undertaken in the community. Also included a chronological timeline of the pandemic. In years ahead, people will probably appreciate that we did that. On that page, we also acknowledge the deaths of residents in the Oliver long-term care homes. Page 39, if you want to take a look at that, that has a really early image of the old solid building, which is the building we're in, some of us are in tonight. We've smattered some historical pictures all the way through it to reflect our 75th anniversary that we celebrated in 2020. Page 18 is a highlight of images of the mayors. We have 18 mayors since incorporation in 1945. And on the second last page, interesting enough, I asked for this image from the Penticton Museum, and I got it in time for this annual report a year later, but it's one of the original photos of the construction of the canal. It's actually a large blown up picture in the new South Okanagan General Hospital. And I think it's a beautiful picture. Yeah, so the report is before council for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, corporate officer. Any questions for the corporate officer or any comments? Not seeing it anyway. Would anyone like to make the motion the council endorse the 2020 annual report prepared under section 98 of the community charter?
So moved.
So moved.
So moved. Second. Any further discussion?
Second. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Any further discussion or comments? Not seeing any. I will call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 2, airport lease, Lauren Andreas, Sunpoint Marine Limited. I'll pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to advise council of the proposed construction of a hangar at the Oliver Airport and to seek your authorization to enter into a lease agreement with the hangar owner. As a little bit of a backup, council was presented with this proposed construction back in March of 2021. Mr. Andres had re-engaged with the town of Oliver to construct the hangar at the airport on the east side by Cessna Street. So the location is on the south side of the Air Cadets hangar. The approximate size is a total of 468 square meters. And the use is to meet our requirements of aircraft and associated parts and materials, and it'll include an office space. Of note for council is that we did enter into a letter of intent with Mr. Andres back in March, and at that time the lease rate was $4 per square meter, based on the 2018 appraisal that we had done for the annual amount of $1,872. Town staff are required to have an updated appraisal, which was requested, and the appraisal has come back at a per annum rate of $3,800. And it shows the breakdown comments from the appraiser. The letter of intent is a non-binding agreement, and that the document that binds the town of Oliver isn't a formal lease agreement. Mr. Andres has provided some correspondence, which I attached to my report. He's displeased with the delays and the increased costs. As I noted earlier, an appraisal request is a requirement of the community charter, and a request was sent to him, to the appraiser, in April, and we received it June 23rd. So there has been a delay, and he did apologize, but that organization is under a lot of pressure as well for requests for appraisals and development work. It's the COVID pandemic hasn't slowed that service down at all. Servicing requests were submitted to the airport manager on May 11th. Mr. Andres' letter said that he hasn't received the servicing costs. They were provided to the airport manager on June 11th, so staff did not delay on that. It just was not communicated to Mr. Andres. So council has some options before you, and you can choose to support the recommendation. You can choose not to support the recommendation, or you can refer back to staff. And the recommendation is that council authorize the construction of a hangar on the Oliver Airport off Cessna Street, and that council direct staff to advertise the disposition of land in accordance with the requirements outlined in section 26 of the community charter, and that council authorize the execution of the lease agreement with Mr. Andres, which is attached to this report dated June 28th, 2021. There's some additional costs that the hangar owner will incur, as we are required to do a legal survey, and he's aware that there's that cost that will be provided to him. I can take any questions if you have them.
Any questions for the corporate officer? Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really don't have any questions for the corporate officer, and I would be happy to move the proposed motion that council authorize the construction of a hangar on the Oliver Airport off Cessna Street, and that council direct staff to advertise the disposition of the land in accordance with the requirements outlined in section 26 of the community charter, and that council authorize the execution of the lease agreement for Mr. Lauren Andres attached with this council report of June 28, 2021. The comment I would make after that, or if I can get someone to second, I guess.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. The comment I would make was, out of all of this in Mr. Andres's letter was the huge increase in the DCC charges for this. I was quite concerned about that. And I think council should be having that on a future agenda to find out what happened and why it happened. I spoke with the director, well, I didn't speak, I had a short email conversation with the director regarding why the DCCs increased by 2.5 times. And then I asked him if the other zones had done the same, and he said no. They virtually remained the same as they were before. It was only this, and that concerns me somewhat. If we're trying to be attractive to businesses to come to Oliver, I'm puzzled as to why we would pick on this particular sector and not sort of share the pain, so to speak, with all of the developers out there, both residential and everything else. So I say that as an aside, and I after this is over, I would probably make another motion that staff come back to us with more information. But we'll work on this one first.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Not seeing any further comments, or is there any questions? If not, I will call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Just as far as another motion goes, would it be a notice of motion that would have to come?
I think that might be more appropriate than, because if staff are to be bringing back a response, that can be done all in a meeting.
Okay. So Councillor Mattis?
How did that end up, Your Worship? Is a notice of motion required? I don't think will so. Staff will just bring back some more information as to why and how that occurred?
We can definitely do a motion, Councillor Mattis.
Okay, then it sounds like I'll have to do it either. Do I have to do it now, or I can do it now?
I think you can do it now, but it would be definitely would be a later meeting.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's the whole idea. That staff be directed to bring back further information regarding the increase by 2.5 times in DCCs for industrial and not other zonings.
I'll second that motion.
Moved in second. I will call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 3, BC's 4-step restart plan. Pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is maybe a little long, but it's to provide you information on current rules for council meetings and to highlight the gradual shift to operations that will take place over the next weeks and months as circumstances related to the pandemic ease, which we certainly hope they do. On June 15th, the province announced that we were in the step 2, which everybody's familiar with. Really not a lot of changes. You know, we still have masks and supposed to remain distant and don't come to work if you're sick. Organized gatherings, meaning for indoor gatherings for over 50 people is now permitted. So that was a big change during the step 2. And the province is recommending that we update our COVID safety plans. I do have a draft that will be going over with the managers tomorrow. We did hope to be in chambers this evening, but we had some technical difficulties in that space. There will still be some concern about the public in that room because it is still really small, and what kind of protocols we'll put in place for that. But we will we'll deal with that as it arises. The province is allowing for electronic meetings and electronic hearings, which we are doing. Council undertook a resolution a number of meetings ago. We amended the procedure bylaw to allow for committees to do electronic meetings. That was what was missing. We participated electronically, except for June to October. We had meetings in the Frank Venables Theatre following the COVID protocols. However, stricter regulations were put in place in November, so we had to go back to the Zoom. As I said, they're asking local governments to review the status of their meetings. I don't anticipate that we need to do anything because we just have a resolution. We can just go back to meetings when we're ready to go back to council chambers, hopefully for the July 12th meeting. The province is, during the pandemic, they made a number of changes to the legislation through the provincial orders, and they're now proposing amendments to Bill 10, which gives more flexibility to local governments with regards to electronic meetings and electronic public hearings. The province has received a lot of really positive feedback that people prefer the Zoom or being able to watch them on webcast, in particular public hearings. Regional districts in particular have had great success with that. So they are going to remove some of those restrictions. They're going to remove limitations on mail-in balloting, so you don't need to be absent or have an illness. They're enabling local governments to borrow from their reserves to pay for operating expenses, and they did delays for revenue anticipating borrowing bylaws and adjusted rules around elections. The CFO advised that we didn't borrow, we didn't do any revenue anticipation borrowing. We were able to maintain our cash flow in a good way, so we didn't do any of that. And we don't need to worry about tax sales because we didn't postpone any of those. So for us, we're good to go. We're working on our COVID protocols, pending what's going to happen with the announcements July 1st from the province, and if they are going to be easing restrictions for local governments or the province as a whole. So I attached a couple of attachments to my report that has the 4 steps and what can be done in offices and workplaces. So I do apologize about chambers. We had a good discussion with our IT people this morning, and the deputy corporate officer and I are going to have some testing tomorrow afternoon with our service provider to see if we can get everything to connect. It sounds like everything's going to. One of the TVs that was purchased for the walls is not functioning, so it's going back on a warranty. So they're shipping a new one, and we'll ship the kaput one back. So we should be good. There just might be a sound thing because that was one of the issues, was an audio card. We wanted to improve the miking because that was one of the biggest concerns from the public, was that they couldn't hear council when they're chatting in a meeting. So we have to make sure that people are always speaking to the mics if we don't have those new audio cards. And that means that there'll be a mic hanging from the ceiling above the chamber's desk. So that should pick up your voices better if you're moving away from your mic. So improvements on the way, we're getting closer. I can take any questions.
Any questions for the corporate officer? Not seeing any. Can I get a mover of the motion that council received 4-step restart plan as information?
So moved.
Heard 2 voices, so moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 4, boundary address adjustment 6450 Spartan Street. Pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is from prior direction from council, and this report is just to confirm your wish to request for a boundary redefinition to the province of British Columbia for 6450 Spartan Street. The resolution that we have on file is not specific and descriptive enough, so I need to do a new resolution so I can get that off my checklist and get that application to the province. So we would, let's just see, I'll go to my, just as a refresher, the 6450 Spartan is the proposed parcel where we were going to put the tower, the radio control tower. It's a town-owned property, but it's in the regional district boundary. So we're looking to do a redefinition to bring that within our boundary. We would need to do a referral to the regional district and the ALC along with this more descriptive resolution to make that change. They advise that they feel that it'll be fairly straightforward in the world of adjusting our letters patent. So the proposed motion before council is that council directs staff to proceed with the boundary redefinition request to the province of British Columbia for 6450 Spartan Street, legally described as Lot 1, Plan KAP 15192, District Lot 2450S, Similkameen Division of Yale Land District, PID 008-875-529. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. Any further discussion or questions? Not hearing any, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to correspondence, I'll pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first piece of correspondence before council is a letter from the Oliver and District Heritage Society. They're advising of their window restoration project has been recognized by Heritage BC with a prestigious award for outstanding work in conservation. I have a proposed motion before council to recognize this achievement, in that council directs staff to draft a congratulatory letter to Oliver and District Heritage Society.
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Second.
I'll
Yeah.
have to recuse myself here as I'm listed. I have a conflict as I'm listed on the award.
You were, I saw that.
That was my idea to use a local contractor, and they wanted to give me credit for that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
No, I did send them a congratulatory email to Juliana, which was shared with the board, but a formal letter is definitely in order as well. We got a motion that's moved and seconded. I will call a question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried.
Thank you. And the next piece of correspondence is a policy directive 2109 from the Liquor Cannabis Regulation and Policy Branch regarding the temporary expanded service area extension, TESA, of revisions and application deadline. To refresh your memory, council at our last meeting directed staff to request a meeting with UBCM regarding the TESAs, as that provision to allow for the expanded service areas was to expire, and the province has seen the benefits and are changing the expiry to June 1st, 2022, and that's to allow time for local governments to make any changes that they're required for these permanent expansions to their service areas. So I was just asking a question if you wish to amend your meeting request or retain your meeting request, or to cancel your meeting request with UBCM regarding this topic. And I'll take your direction.
I was the one that brought this forward, so I would definitely move that we cancel it. We don't need it for sure. The changes that have come forward are great, and they're also have the ability, people also have the ability, businesses do, to apply for permanent status as well. So this is exactly what the conversation was about, and I'm glad the province is being proactive about it.
I'll second.
And I second, moved it, okay. Any further discussion? Not hearing any, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried.
Thank you. And the last is for information. It's 3 policy directives from the Liquor Cannabis Regulation Policy Branch. And I included an email from Interior Health that just provided some excellent resources for community planning to help increase awareness of potential health risks associated with the heat to protect residents and communities. And we've utilized a lot of those resources in our social media posts. And we've made a couple of signs, which we have out on Main Street now, and and bylaws going out, handing out water, and that's being well received in the community as well. And the proposed motion that the items listed in K3 and the weekly mail be received.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to council reports, Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Your Worship. On Monday, June 21st, along with the rest of council, I attended the send-off for the OIB as they traveled up to Kamloops for a private ceremony regarding the residential school findings. Later that week, I completed, along with Councillor Ventimiglia, we completed our Resilient Civic Leadership course, which I thought was great. I'd just like to take a moment to thank the corporate officer for her great work this month. Not only was she still doing her full-time corporate officer work, but she was acting CAO as well. So I'm sure she'll be glad when our new CAO arrives next Monday, but I'd like to thank her for all the extra things she did while covering this month of June when she had two hats to wear. And that's it for me. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the 21st, the OIB send-off. June 23rd, there was a meeting of the ORL Finance Committee. And unfortunately, the corporate officer won't be taking off that hat for a while. I'm sure she'll feel like she's still doing both jobs.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be wordy here as usual, but I'll try to keep it quick. On June 16th, I met with a gentleman named Jordan Simmons from a company called Nominee. So basically, they're developing a platform and they're looking for mentors for potential nominees who are BIPOC, women, LGBTQ, and just younger nominees to run for office. So we had a really interesting conversation about that, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from him as the platform develops. Monday the 21st, I joined Mayor and Council as well as many residents of Oliver in showing our support and sending off our OIB members as they traveled to Kamloops for a gathering to honor the 215 children whose remains were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School. On behalf of Parks and Rec, I also traveled to Kamloops with my daughter to pay my respects. On June 21st, when I got back, I had a Oliver Parks and Rec meeting. So much of the discussion revolved around how Parks and Rec can answer the calls for action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, as well as what the stages of reopening may look like for Parks and Rec. Thursday, the 24th, I participated in a roundtable discussion with Minister Bear regarding passive infrastructure and connectivity across the province and in our region. So my takeaway was basically, although our connectivity is not perfect in Oliver, it was quite apparent that we're faring pretty well compared to other communities. So that was encouraging for us to hear, as well as today's meetings. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Councillor Grace. On June 17th, I had RDOS. On June 21st, I also attended the OIB send-off. I'd just like to say I did have an opportunity to talk to Chief Louie later in the week, and he was clearly moved by the support shown by the community. June 23rd, I had a conference call with Minister Osborne and Minister Eby, discussion regarding housing needs in the communities, and also a lot of the discussion came around support for cooling stations, looking at activities to support people during weather emergencies. And then later in the evening, the Oliver Clinic Advisory Committee meeting that was led by divisions. And on June 24th, I did have a meeting with RCMP Sergeant Rigglesworth. And our next upcoming meeting is on July 12th, regular open meeting, and hopefully we will be able to have that in our chambers. I know the corporate officer is working hard on that, and it sounds very positive. Acting mayor schedule for June, July, and August is Councillor Grice. Public question period. I don't see anybody in attendance.
No.
So we will pass over to looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second, please.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, council. Stay safe and stay cool.